Good to have everyone here this evening. My name is Dante Wells. I am the chair of One Next Community Organizing Task Force, and I would like to welcome all of you to our Black Liberation Workshop titled Civic Engagement in the POC Community. Allow me to go over rules of engagement. First, we will hold all questions until the end of the until our panelists are done speaking, and then if you have a question, you can also type it in our chat box and it will be read after our panelists are done speaking. So thank you for all taking the time to be here this evening. Again, like I said, my name is Dante Wells, and I am the community organizing chair of One Part of the reason why I joined One was because of their core mission, which is to directly fight systems of racism, similar to the painful experience I had as a child. Like the rest of OneM's leader team, I want to help protect Black and Brown kids here in the school district and the greater community of Mamaroneck. Part of our mission is to advocate for and create a safe space for the Black and Brown community. We do this through programs and events like our pop-up museums, our drive-ins, and now a series of virtual workshops, all which are intended to educate the community on systemic injustices, especially racism. This Black Liberation Workshop opens up a much needed conversation on why and how getting involved in activism and politics can be powerful tools. We will hear from our amazing panelists who are leaders in their own communities. Then we will open up the floor for, then we will open up the floor for an authentic back and forth dialogue. Please leave all questions till the end and raise your hand virtually using the features on your Zoom to be called on, or type them in our chat where our moderator and my colleague Shannon Purdy will see them. And now it is my moderator's distinct pleasure to introduce the City of Peekskill's Councilwoman, Vanessa, Councilwoman Vanessa Agudelo. Thank you.
Thank you, Dante. And just a few words about the Councilwoman in case you didn't have an opportunity to check out her bio or her website. The fact that she basically runs her own calendar, I'm amazed. It's completely enormous that we were reaching out to you directly to coordinate this. So thank you so much for being here again. A proud first-generation Colombian-American, Councilwoman Vanessa Agudelo has combined her passion for environmental justice and her love of community to empower people from the bottom up. After finishing her BA in international politics and archaeology at Penn State, Vanessa moved back to Peekskill, which is kind of in the upper Hudson Valley area, to make a difference locally and address the issues facing her community, fighting against the Spectra natural gas pipeline expansion, and then later becoming appointed to the city's Conservation Advisory Council. It was Vanessa's environmental advocacy and commitment to justice that led to her becoming the youngest person elected to the city council at 25 years old in 2017. Councilwoman Agudelo is currently the New York Immigration Coalition's Hudson Valley Member Engagement Manager and has worked alongside coalition partners to pass the Green Light Bill in 2019, which gives all residents of the state of New York access to driver's license regardless of their status. And as you mentioned earlier, Councilwoman Agudelo, you know full well about the Community Resource Center in Mamaroneck, which is a vibrant hub that has a host of services for our Latinx partners and neighbors. So welcome, and we'll now turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. As was said, my name is Vanessa Agudelo. I'm a Peekskill City Council member, and I'm really excited to be here with you all. A big thank you to Dante and OneM Mamaroneck for reaching out to me. It's really an honor to be asked to be here with such awesome panelists. And just kudos to you all for convening this space and hosting this very important conversation through the lens of Black liberation, which I think is something that needs to be done much more often and much more intentionally. And with that, I do want to just even acknowledge that although I do identify as a person of color, I want to acknowledge the fact that I am a white passing Latina, and those privileges that I benefit from because of that also play as really like as shackles for my colleagues who are Black and browned and are don't benefit from those same privileges because of my light fair skin. So I just want to put that out there, and that doesn't take away from the struggles that I've faced myself as a first generation Colombian American proud daughter of two Colombian immigrants. And really, I think that that's the lens in which I will be speaking from, because that's, where I can speak from. And I hope that my story serves as a reflection about our governing system and how intentional it has been, or really like fundamentally like how white supremacy has been wrapped into its the fundamental building blocks of a lot of our institutions, especially our governing system. And I think that that still very much plays out in how we can civically engage with those systems, in or outside of that system, right? And this is coming from someone who is on the inside. So just a little bit about myself. Peekskill is the city that I call my home. I've never really lived anywhere else outside of Peekskill. I grew up there. It holds a special place for me because of that, but also because it's the first place my parents and my family bought property in this country. My parents are both immigrants from Colombia, two different regions of the country. They didn't even know each other prior to coming to this country. In fact, they met in Queens over at Astoria, where a lot of Colombians, there's still a very rich Colombian population in Queens, but that's where my parents met. And later got married and had myself and my brother, and we come from really humble upbringing. Both my parents were undocumented, came over illegally. My dad via La Frontera, my mother overstaying her visa. So we struggled being in kind of a mixed status home, but being able to benefit from a lot of great or semi comprehensive immigration policies that were passed during a time where my parents were able to get their status. But even with that, my father worked 17-hour days, 6 days a week, and my mother, as a domestic worker, worked long hours as well, did really hard, laborious work, and got paid very little money with no benefits, no health insurance, completely kind of relied on my father. And thank God, after my father was able to get status, was able to get a full-time job as a janitor and now general handyman, and was able to get that the health insurance for my brother, my mother, and myself. And like very many immigrant families, they instill this idea that, you know, you work hard, you go to school, you get good grades, and you won't have to suffer the way we've suffered. And it made me really internalize a lot of our struggles. It made me feel as though it was an us problem instead of connecting it to kind of the wider problem that existed. And so I kind of fell into that trap, thinking that if I study really hard, I go to college, I work really hard to get good grades, get a good job, I'll be able to take care of my family, and that'll be that, and that's how we all get ahead, right? Like, that's the way you get ahead in this country. And it's my parents' fault, it's my family, my extended family's fault for not being educated enough, for not, you know, working hard enough. And of course, you don't say these things out loud, like consciously, but that is kind of the subconscious underneath all of that when you internalize these kinds of issues. And going into college, it really opened my eyes. It wasn't so much, and I went to Penn State University, not a, you know, a very radical college, but I think my studies, and especially my being able to have gone to places like Egypt during the Arab Spring, and Israel for an archaeological field school, and later Uganda, I started realizing that this was more of a systemic issue that we were facing, and it was we all didn't have an even footing to acquire the same kind of opportunities and have access to the same kind of opportunities to get ahead as an individual or as families. And they were generations of people that had been marginalized and shut out completely from these opportunities for very like intentional reasons. And once I started to be exposed to that, and I think that there was a pivotal moment actually after college. I got a job, and it was a seasonal job with this organization called Nourish International in Uganda. And we were sent there to Jinja County, where we stayed in this remote village. And we did a number of things with this grassroots organization. And it was myself and these other girls from college who were sophomores, juniors, weren't necessarily business majors. We were essentially just like privileged, like white women who went to college, who now had access to this organization that found funds to like send you over to a country, a developing country, and to I guess pass down your expertise, but there was no real expertise that was spelled out. So when we got there, we were given the task of helping build this village banking system. And I realized that there was like nothing much more that we can do that these women couldn't do for themselves, right? And all this money that was spent on us could have really been spent on investing in that community, training these women, empowering these women. And I realized at that moment that I had taken part in volunteerism, right? What is very well known as volunteerism. And I think that really, it was like a reckoning time for me. And I decided that I wanted to go home and go to Peekskill, go to the place that raised me, the place that I kind of had turned my back on because I wanted to be successful. I wanted to get ahead. I wasn't like connecting these systemic problems, how, you know, people who raised me, the people around me, my friends, my neighbors were facing the same things. And so I went back home with this idea that, you know, the people closest to the problems are the ones closest to the solution. And I got involved locally. And at that time, Bernie Sanders was running for president. This was 2015 going into 2016. And his message really spoke to me in a way that no other political candidate had spoken to me. And it made me, his whole platform, you know, and I didn't grow up in a very political family. My parents never really voted. We were very religious. My parents came from conservative Roman Catholic backgrounds. I went to Catholic school my whole life until college. And so it was, I always kind of had some like moral standpoint and what I thought the world should be like, but never really kind of had the vehicle to bring that into action in a way that I could materially see how I could impact those changes around me. And it was Bernie Sanders really who started connecting those dots for me. And when he lost his primary in New York and dropped out, one thing he really said is that change happens from the bottom up and you have to start local. And that really spoke to me. And I started getting involved as an activist more on environmental issues because we were, Peekskill is an environmental justice community. It's one of the poorest cities in Westchester County after Mount Vernon. And we are designated an environmental justice community because we have the #1 polluter in Westchester County by 6 times right in our backyard. It's the Wheelbrader, the garbage incinerator. People from Westchester County and the tri-state area truck all their garbage and have it burned right in our city. And we, our residents, have to take on that disproportionate burden of having that indirectly kind of in our air, in our lungs. And so reasons like that really turned my attention to the environment and ways in which I can get involved and impact change there. And we found out that there was a pipeline, 2 pipelines that were being expanded. These pipelines were built 105 feet away from what was the oldest operating nuclear power plant in the country, Indian Point. Now it's being decommissioned, but they were turning these 24-inch pipelines that should have never been built there in the first place, nearly doubling their size to 42 inches. And there is a group who had been part of a number of direct actions in Brooklyn and other places throughout the region trying to stop these pipelines, came in and essentially trained us on not only the seeker process, the process in which the developer would have to go to their local government in order to get approval for these permits in order to go into operation and construct or expand these pipelines. But they also trained us in how if we were past that point, if these permits were given, and at that moment we were past that point, permits have been passed. Our state legislator were on the side of Spectre, who at the time we were fighting. We had to hold the line and bring awareness and advocacy to this subject by putting our bodies on the line and getting arrested and drawing a legal lawsuit on the premise that we felt in danger, that these pipelines were endangering our communities because of the fatal, the climate catastrophe that we were facing. And although we weren't able to stop that pipeline, it became kind of the foundation for a number of other communities to kind of take what we had learned and best practices to create their own campaigns and eventually stop pipelines in their community. So I really come from an activist framework, and it was that background that I think was the lens in which I saw my way to influence the most change in terms of civic engagement. And eventually, I think that that's what propelled me into running for office. And I never had this idea that I wanted to be a politician. I was actually asked by the local Democratic committee to run. And after being asked about 9 times, I finally said yes. Because I was told that it was my responsibility to step in when no one else was stepping in, and that was true, right? So I did that, and I quickly realized that although I had ran on the most diverse slate ever seen in Peekskill, we were a slate of all people of color. We won, completely swept the Republicans who had a minority. They were 3 to 4 in our council at that time. Even though it was a fully Democratic council and the local party very much uplifted my candidacy, when I started to become vocal on issues that impacted communities of color, Black and brown people, issues like housing, issues like sustainability, issues such as transparent government, there was a muzzle put on me. And then I became divisive, and there was a bottleneck situation that came out of it, where I wasn't being given the same kind of information others were being given, or I wasn't being given the same opportunity to contribute on a problem, on a project that the council was working on, because I was voting against what the majority was saying around developments that we were putting forth for housing, for example. So it really, to me, I think that speaks to this idea that we keep telling people, and I think our party sometimes tells people that we need more representation, and yet we make it so hard for people to actually have their voices heard when they're speaking to the issues that are impacting us the most, right? Those votes that should be taken in our own self-interest are then being used against us, because in what has been in my experience, we're then being seen as the enemy or as a tool of the opponent, the Republican Party. And unfortunately, that tends to be the reality in local areas like Westchester. But I think I think this is all to say that the only reason that my colleagues and local electeds can get away with this is because people get so excited about elections that feature people of color, people that look like them, people that sound like them, and then once they're elected, they're gone, right? They disappear. They're not holding them. They're not holding them accountable. They think, oh, well, because so and so is Black, or because so and so is Latina, they're gonna hold the community down. We don't have to worry about it. But the thing is, like, this governing system wears you down. It is not made to integrate feedback and change. It is ultimately not made for us, and I truly believe that. And it's our job to continue to hold the line, hold each other accountable, and show up for those people who are putting their neck on the line, because it's not an easy thing to do, but not only just show up for those people, be one of those people, right? Especially if you are in a position to be one of those people. So use your political capital, use whatever capital you have in the community, continue to organize, build those connections of solidarity, and always hold your leaders accountable, always, and I'm saying that as a local council member myself, and I tell my community, if I'm ever falling short, if I'm ever doing something that is not truly benefiting the collective, you need to let me know. Like, have a serious conversation with me. And I should be enough of a person to listen, to understand, to admit that I'm wrong, and to want to bring you into a place so that we can both change this, find a solution, and move forward, right? Because it's not about taking power away from anyone. It's about, to me, it's about giving power away, or reactivating the power that we all should have, right? That we supposedly have, but don't really have, given the current restraints. So anyways, I think I spoke for maybe a little longer than I should have, but thank you all so much for having me. And I apologize for maybe going a little off the rails.
Councilwoman Agudelo, thank you so much. I personally want to give you a round of applause. As you were speaking, I felt the passion that you spoke with, and the fieriness that you have, and it's motivating your story of how you came to where you are today. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And when it comes to causing good trouble, OneM is really unpopular in our area. So
yeah. Totally can relate.
So I do, and I can imagine everybody's got a million questions already. Just hold on to them, please, because now we'd love to welcome Dr. Norrell Edwards, our neighbor from New Rochelle. Dr. Edwards is currently the Volunteer Director of Communications for Next Step Forward, and a New York-based grassroots organization focused on making progress to eradicate systemic racism. The organization recently launched some social media campaigns to bring awareness to important and relevant topics like police reform, gentrification in Edwards' hometown of New Rochelle. She received her PhD from the University of Maryland, College Park. I was there during Len Bias's years, so that's really cool. and the 21st century Black diaspora in 21st century Black diaspora literature. Both her employment experience and research interests place her work at the nexus of global Black identity, cultural memory, and social justice. And we very much hope that you can assist OneM Meredith with some of our future pop-up museums. That would be super cool. She's worked with several criminal justice and education-based focused nonprofit organizations such as Georgetown University's Prison and Justice Initiative, the Drug Policy Alliance, Advancing Real Change, Johns Hopkins Institute for Education Policy, and Tandem Ed. And certainly be like all of us and follow Dr. Edwards on her Twitter at Norrell Explains. We actually were part of, I think it was the Kamal Flowers
Yes.
march, and
Absolutely.
yeah,
That was the one.
so powerful.
Yes, it was amazing. That was a march from Mount Vernon to
New
Rochelle. Yes, we were in that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Welcome, Dr. Edwards.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much to OneM Meredith and to Dante and Shannon for organizing. I know that you've worked really hard to put this together, and I'm so happy to be here with you all virtually. So first I should say that Next Step Forward Initiative was founded by several Black men from Norrell who wanted to organize a march in the wake of the in the death of George Floyd for our community. I would be remiss if I did not shout out each and every one of them: Jamal Gill, Malik Gill, Alex Farron, Rennie Woodland, Rakeem Callens, Vaughn Parham, Sinian Marcellus, and Blaze Jones Yellen. A month after the protest, and Norrell grappled with its own case of police brutality with the murder of Kamal Flowers, Jamal reached out to me and said Next Step Forward wants to support and represent Black women. But there was one problem: they did not have any Black women members. He said I was the first person he thought of asking to join, and I was elated to do so. First, I had been closely following the Kamal Flowers case. A traffic stop for no clear reason turned into a foot chase that ended in Kamal's death, just 2 short days after Next Step Forward held a historic anti-police brutality protest in Norrell that gathered 2,000 people. The Norrell Police Department claimed Kamal had a gun and that somehow warranted both tasing him and shooting him 4 times. The grainy video footage we do have from the incident does not support Kamal being armed. The video does not show any confrontation between the officer and Kamal that would mean the officer feared for his life. As we all know, well, police have a long history of planning fake evidence to absolve themselves of wrongdoing. I wanted to join Next Step to help bring light to Kamal's case and recognize the lack of justice it had received, as so many police brutality cases do. From my previous experience in criminal justice reform, I'm certain that Kamal, as a formerly incarcerated person, was written off as delinquent, and his previous charges were used to excuse this incident. Supporting police reform and placing attention on Kamal's story has been a big part of the work Next Step Forward has tried to engage in. And that's part of the reason I was happy to join. A second reason was because as a scholar, I really recognize the importance of Jamal acknowledging that they needed Black women. Much of the Black feminist movement of the 1960s and 1970s coalesced around Black women feeling alienated by both Black men who focused on race and civil rights and white women who focused on only gender equality and feminism. As Kimberly Crenshaw and other Black feminists have shown, these movements did not take an intersectional approach to understand how overlapping identities impact Black women, Black queer women, or even Latinx women, differently abled or gender non-conforming individuals, or a myriad of different combinations of identities. Even as recently as the Black Lives Matter movement, at first we saw an increased focus on Black male victims of police brutality while Black women went unnoticed. Protests around Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor, as well as the Say Her Name campaign, helped dispel the misbelief that police brutality was only a Black male issue. I was happy to bring my Black woman experience, perspective, and knowledge on Black history and culture to Next Step. Third, one of the reasons why I was really excited to join Next Step Forward was because my family has very deep roots in Norrell. I come from a long line of strong, independent Black women. My grandmother, sister, and mother all went to Norrell High School, and myself included. My family has been here since the early 1920s, when my great-grandmother came up north during the Great Migration. My family lived alongside the Lincoln Corridor in Norrell for literal generations. To this day, my grandmother, who'll be celebrating her 97th birthday in April, lives in a nursing home in New Rochelle. Increasingly, Next Step Forward has been involved with a campaign to recognize gentrification in New Rochelle, which I've been a part of as well. The topic is of great personal importance to me. Gentrification and high cost of living pushes out families like mine from New Rochelle. I never met my great-grandmother, but I know that she worked cleaning houses for white people in the North End. I think about the historic inequality and equity that my family members have faced and having access to only certain kinds of jobs and opportunities in the 1930s, in the 1940s, the 1950s, in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, even the 2000s. And I want to help historic wrongs for other Black communities in New Rochelle. Well, for Black communities all over, but especially for Black communities in New Rochelle, for those that are still left, because again, they are being pushed out. I'm interested in supporting existing New Rochelle activists and organizations like NRC2A and New Roar to improve our community for all people of color, but especially African Americans who have faced a long history of repression and unequal access in New Rochelle. Over the last few years, New Rochelle has had a lot of million-dollar development companies who started putting up very expensive high-rise buildings in the downtown area that do not cater to New Rochelle residents in the South Side. Instead, these developers aim to bring in young, well-off professionals from New York City into New Rochelle. Worse yet, while receiving millions in tax breaks, they have not even tried to hire New Rochelle-based construction workers or businesses. New Rochelle has an economic and non-discrimination policy that requests developers award 10% of contracts to local businesses, that 20% of the dollar value of subcontracts be awarded to New Rochelle businesses, and 20% of work hours go to targeted residential workers. Reports show that only two of 78 prime contracts were awarded to New Rochelle businesses. That is 3% instead of 10. Only 1% of the dollar value of subcontracts was awarded to New Rochelle businesses, and less than 10% of workers were New Rochelle residents, rather than the goal of 20%. These are abysmal numbers. Instead of giving millions of dollars in tax breaks to these developers, the New Rochelle local government should be focusing on how to pour resources back into the people who are from here and want to stay here. My PhD took me from New York to the DC area. And in my time pursuing my degree and working for various nonprofit organizations, I learned a lot about policy and advocacy. And what is the point of me amassing all of these skills and knowledge if I can't share it with my home community? When I think about Black liberation, I think about equity. And a colleague of mine had said recently, we want to live in coexistence, not dependence. The history of African Americans in the US has always been a history of subordination, marginalization, and dependence. True freedom means Black people can peacefully coexist in this country and have the same kinds of life expectancies, health outcomes, wealth, and social economic mobility as white people. Let's remember that, and I have a couple of statistics here, that in 2017, 10.6% of African Americans were uninsured, compared with 5.9% of non-Hispanic whites. 44.1% of African Americans had government health insurance coverage in 2017. And we all know with the way that our current health system is set up, that you are better off with private insurance more often than not. African Americans have the highest mortality rate for all cancers combined, compared with any other racial and ethnic group. And there are 11 infant deaths per 1,000 live births among Black Americans. This is almost twice the national average of the 5.8 infant deaths per 1,000 live births. And of course, we've seen a lot of the trending headlines about mortality rates for Black mothers. And without question, the pandemic and the rise of COVID-19 has shown us even more starkly the health disparities that exist for African Americans that relate specifically to inequality, inequity, and race. So I'm really happy to be here and to take part in these conversations. I also do want to acknowledge that I have taken part of Next Step Forward as someone who's not lived recently in New York, but as someone who wishes to support and uplift grassroots organizations happening in the area, to take the resources that I have, the connections I've built from all the work I've done outside these past years to bring to my home community, and hopefully to create a place that I could one day afford to live myself and to sort of grow a family. Thank you.
Dr. Edwards, thank you so much. Wow. You have done first and foremost, you are deeply rooted in the community of New Rochelle. That's very touching. And speaking of New Rochelle, one is actually in partnership with the NAACP to help fight our core mission, which is for equity in our school district. So that's amazing. I just would like to make that tie there. Thank you so much. To both of our panelists. From hearing both of your perspectives, you know, the coming of age story, so to speak, you know, it was very, it seems like there was liberation, you know, mentally, that gave you a call to action. And I could honestly highly appreciate that and relate, because that's the same way how I kind of felt here when I joined OneM. You're rising to your purpose, so to speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you again, Dr. Edwards and Councilwoman Agudelo. I am now going to open up the floor, and I see we've got a great number of attendees that have joined. And first question is from my fellow board member, Diana Lovett. So Diana, I am going to unmute you.
Hi guys, thanks so much for organizing this this panel. I had a question for Councilwoman Agudelo. Much of Westchester is politically liberal, but still highly segregated, and this segregation affects our housing, schools, and all aspects of our daily lives. What are ways that you've seen this being addressed in a meaningful way, or at all?
Yeah, no, I think that there's been a lot of positive change in some ways over the last few years. At the very least, on a county level, like my full-time job, because my council position is seen as like a part-time job, is with New York Immigration Coalition, and we partnered with a number of our member organizations. One of them being Community Resource Center, which is a really amazing, powerful organization in Mamaroneck, but also just across the state, the work that they do. And a number of our other members to craft the Immigrant Protection Act, which was something that was passed in Westchester County, that kind of speaks to the need in that moment, which was to ensure that there were privacy protections in place and that people's status weren't being reported over to DHS or to immigration enforcement, law enforcement in any way, shape, or form. So I think on a county level, there has been some movement. Housing, I think we're very, 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 very much behind. I coming from a place, like I represent one of, first of all, Peekskill has the highest foreclosure rate in Westchester County. We also have the highest percentage of rent burdened individuals in the whole county. And what that means is that just to give you an idea, half of our residents are renters, and a third of those residents, they're paying half of their income towards rent on a monthly basis. And this was pre-COVID time, right? And we know that you should be paying no more than a third of your income in order to have the resources you need to put food on the table and just other living expenses. And none of the policies that I think anyone is passing in Westchester County are truly enough. It's sad to say, but I think it's important to say, because now we're seeing an influx of New Yorkers who are fleeing New York City, and making it so developers want to build luxury apartments because they want to kind of capitalize off this, off the fact that there's a bigger demand. And now, like what that is producing in Peekskill, for example, I just had a big fight with my colleagues because they voted to sell public land to build luxury apartments with a 1-bedroom starting at $2,200. A 1-bedroom, $2,200. You need to be making over $100,000 in order to afford it. Right? So like building for people who are living here. We're not addressing the rent burden, the severe rent burdenness of our current residents who are taxpayers, who are, the owners of that public land we essentially just sold off, right? And essentially that's facilitating gentrification and facilitating them ultimately being pushed out. So I would love for us as municipalities locally to all take a stand against this. And I think that we look at each other and say, well, if we put down these bold demands, then no one's going to want to build here. But if we're all putting them down, they can't say no, right? And that's the solidarity. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you so much.
No, great points. And then, certainly that was a highlight of Dr. Edwards' presentation as well.
Absolutely.
And as the both of you were talking, I was just sitting here thinking, like, why can't we find like a, Dr. Edwards and Councilwoman Agudelo in every single Westchester municipality and like have a big Zoom and just, storm the county executive. So, all right, who's up next? Questions, ideas, thoughts? This is not a shy group. Oh, I see a hand up. Let's see. That is Andreen Smith. Good evening, Andreen.
Good evening. How are you? I just wanted to check in and ask, because you shared the story regarding the pipeline in Peekskill and the defeat you guys faced in sort of fighting against that. And I'm wondering, how did you manage to overcome that? What was your reaction? How did you get up the next day and continue to fight? I'm just wondering, how do you get over something like that and continue to work together towards progress?
That's a really great question. And it isn't easy. When we found out that the pipelines were going into operation and there was nothing we can do about it, it was a really sad moment, sad week for all of us. But I think that I would have never crossed paths with the individuals who have played honestly a very fundamental role in my activism, the way I advocate, just the way, really molded me to be the person I am. And I hold a lot of dear appreciation for that. I wouldn't be here. So I think that community that you build in this fight is that is like the seed that we're sowing. Like, I think that in what we should be doing, and the only way this is going to work is if we build a bigger and bigger movement and bring more and more people in, and we start getting people feeling like they have stakes in this, right? And the way that all of us who came together fighting this pipeline felt like we were in danger, our community is in danger, we need to act. And we had commiserated over that loss, but found each other, found people that felt the same way, and really held on to that solidarity, knowing that we could continue to make this community bigger and fight bigger fights. And ultimately, I mean, these are folks that have fought to ensure that the decommissioning of Indian Point is being overseen by the community and the contract is not handed over to a company that ultimately doesn't have the community's best interest in mind, right? They're much more profit driven. So the fight isn't over because it wasn't, that small fight is over, but I think we're only building off of it. And I think we're on path to win the war, so to say. I really do believe that.
That's awesome. I do have a question for Dr. Norrell Edwards as well. I'm just wondering, how do you form those types of partnerships and community that you talk about, especially across differences? So partnering between the Black and the Latino communities to work together on these types of initiatives.
I think it really just starts with, reaching out, right? You have to reach out, you say, look, I'm really interested in working with you. I want to really hear you out. I want us to work collaborative. We have so much, in common. I think that even the idea of this workshop, right, Black liberation and how it impacts people of color broadly. If we think about everyone and not just, I think sometimes we get into these kind of like silos, But if we think about ways that, oppression overlaps for multiple communities, for Native communities, for Latinx communities, too often people of color, we feel like we are in competition with each other for the little bit of crumbs that we receive in terms of, a spot at the table. And we really have to sort of to recognize that and put that aside and think about how we can sort of advocate for each other, right? To show up for each other. So I really just tried to do that in terms of just being willing to show up, to start conversations, to be able to start dialogues. I feel like that is really one of the, I think just coming with your sort of authenticity and genuineness really does go a long way in terms of supporting people. I think we're always going to find reasons to say, oh, this person, I have these differences. We're all unique. We're all going to have differences that we need to figure out. And I mentioned intersectionality before, and I'm teaching a global women's literature class. So this is really on time for me about that. But thinking about that, the ways that we all have unique differences, but how can we bring those together to speak to all of those and to advocate for policies that see all of us and see all our unique differences and take those into consideration. And that isn't too much to ask.
Beautifully said. And that's a Bernie Sandersism if I ever heard one too. He borrowed it from you, of course, Dr. Edwards. But I just hid the chat on myself. Oh, come on. I'm not being a very good moderator. Here we are. We have another question in the chat for you, Dr. Edwards, about Governor Cuomo's recent police reform bill. And having had the experience of being asked by our local municipalities, gee, OneM, would you help us, get folks to participate in these surveys? And we promise they're going to be anonymous, and we promise they're going to make change. A lot of it seems performative. So we're just wondering, are there any municipalities that you know of that have any kind of, speaking of breadcrumbs, real meaningful police reform? And if so, what specific tactics?
So let me first say that I'm so glad you brought up the Cuomo's executive order, because that's something we're working on right now. Norrell is literally sort of revising the proposal Norrell government has put forward, and feels like, right, it's performative, feels like, okay, you're saying all this stuff to the governor, but when it comes to actual implementation, it's not really going to be, the power is going to be in the hands of the people. So we have a public meeting coming up. I don't know if anyone here is from Norrell, but I can put the link where you can sign up to speak if you want to talk about that, to just push back against what they have as the proposal. So I'm so glad you brought that up. In terms of local communities that have done this well, I'm not sure about local communities yet. But I do also want to say that, and I can give my email, or I'm not sure how we're facilitating, connecting with people afterwards. But I have my supervisor over to the Drug Policy Alliance now works with Marilyn Mosby, and I've been sort of, asking him. I know they've been looking at police reform, like trying to get tips from him. And something he said that was really interesting to me was that they have been able to sort of ask for specific reforms that or create specific laws that actually override the police officers' contracts. And what we've gotten a lot of lately is like, oh, the contracts are set in stone. Oh no, legally, that can't work because of the police contracts. So that's really a particular interest to me, because it feels very much like what they're telling us is if you want reform, it really has to be in this sort of like way that doesn't give too much power and keeps all the power that be, as is. So I think some of the things that he mentioned to me was about, better whistleblower protection, repealing the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, sharing info on police misconduct, public use of force misconduct, and then of course independent prosecutors, which we have some of that, I think, in the language for the Cuomo's executive order. But again, it just feels a little bit like, some of it also is tied into, the county, and okay, well, we might have to wait because the county is reviewing different recommendations, and there's a question of, okay, like, well, how long will this take? And a colleague and I who are working together, we've actually been meeting with we're trying to meet with every single Norrell City Council member to talk to them about, well, what can you offer the community in terms of acknowledging white supremacy? Because after what happened on the Capitol, right, we all realize that basically, police can easily be corrupted. Police force can easily be corrupted. And if it could happen, and one of the most sort of well-trained, well-resourced police forces in the country, it surely can happen in any of our local police forces. So what are you doing to acknowledge the threat that is white supremacy? What are you doing to acknowledge the threat of domestic terrorism that is white supremacy? What are you doing to talk about that? And so I think one of our most immediate goals, because in terms of the Cuomo's executive order and who knows how long some of that will take in terms of implementation, is that we want to know right now where you stand on white supremacy. And we don't want just like a statement that says from the top that's like, oh yeah, we don't believe in that. Of course not, that's supposed to just satisfy everyone. We want you to be having conversations within the entire organization that shows people, that talks about how people are feeling, where they stand. We just met with the city manager, earlier this week to talk about that. And to say, and he said, oh, we feel like, I feel like that doesn't reflect us. I'm pretty certain, I'm sure. It's like, well, how do you know? You just said there's 600 employees in this government. How do you know? And how do you know if you don't talk to them? How do you know if you don't work on creating dialogue and having transparency? You don't. And so that's why it's really important to figure out a way to talk about these things. So that is one of the most immediate things for us, is we really want Norrell government to take a stand and not just a kind of like, performative, check off the box stand on white supremacy, but to really start talking about it, to start thinking about it in a specific way, as a danger, as a threat, something that needs to constantly be mitigated and thought about, and also just taken seriously and put real resources into those things, put money into that. And that's also why we're going to talk to every single council member. My colleague just emailed a council member who doesn't want to talk to us and said, well, what does that tell you about your feelings about this issue, right? So you're going to talk to us about white supremacy. This is a conversation that needs to be had.
Wow, that's fantastic. No, I love it.
Thank you so much. That passion is amazing.
Certainly, we've dealt with the, police leadership at the local level, looking around for nonprofits that are happy to endorse them for certain types of training. But we know full well, because of the beauty of social media, that you've got officers in your department that were organizing Blue Lives Matter hate rallies, over the summer. So,
Right. So that alone makes me want to, and that's the beauty of this workshop. Sorry to take away from questions for a moment. That right there inspired me to say, hey, why don't I look at what the PD is doing, especially when they have the whole Blue Lives Matter coexisting with the Trump rally on the day of when we were painting a Black Lives Matter mural. They were parading on the J Street, trying to heckle us and looking for a reaction out of us. That makes me want to, ask PD, are you doing anything to, to combat white supremacy in the district, and where do you stand on it, as opposed to just asking us to support something because of who we are. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right, I am sad that we're running low on time.
Let's keep the questions flowing.
We've got a couple of other.
We have time for about 2 more. Marissa?
We just have. Looking for raised hands.
Raised hands. Here we go.
Here we go. We've got a raised hand. Is that Andreen again?
Yes, it is.
All right.
Amazing.
Hi again. My question is, how do you address, or what's the best way to address those people who say that they are your allies in the fight for racial or social justice, but they're basically asking to slow down? Let's study the issue a bit more. Let's reconsider, maybe you're moving too fast. Because I know you mentioned that sometimes it's easy to get into office and then you lose your focus, right? Or you end up changing a bit because you've been in there too long and the system is set up a certain way. So I'm wondering, what do you do? And this question is really addressed to both of you. Like, what's the best way to address that and to keep that same energy and passion that led you into leadership in the first place, without brushing people aside?
So I'll answer that question very quickly because I think Dr. Edwards probably has some really great gems to share here. But I will say that there were, yes, you get worn down when you tend to be the only person who is putting forth bold policies that people are against because of the pressure they might get from the real estate industry, for example, which is something we've heard a lot when it comes to housing issues like the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, and excuses as to why we can't expand that into peak scale as well. But I don't believe that. I believe that the work I'm doing is sowing the seeds for people to come after me who will eventually take a majority of that council, right? Of our collective consciousness, so to say. I think that there has to be someone who is willing to push the boundaries and be part of the discourse and put forth a vision that maybe others may be against in this moment and perhaps people are not ready for. But I think that by adding this conversation piece into the discourse and making these bigger visions that might seem radical as an option for people to consider, that in itself I think is a very powerful thing, and I think that motivates others to get involved. And like as an example for me, like how am I personally battling that issue in my city council? Well, I'm in a 4-year term, and my term is up at the end of this year. Right, I got elected in 2017. My term is ending in a couple months or in several months. And I decided to run for re-election, not with my colleagues, not with, even though they're Democrats. I decided that our policies did not align, and I would rather see community advocates there in places of power who will vote in the self-interest of those who are being most marginalized, most burdened by the socioeconomic aspects of our communities and just of, historically speaking as well. So I think it's building out, building that community and being around people who believe in your vision and organizing with those people and continue to build out and build bigger, not necessarily compromising, obviously always wanting to draw consensus with the people who see your vision, but continuing to build that movement, because that kind of solidarity, that kind of organizing is what is going to bring us to leaders who we're seeing right now in Congress, for example. So many leaders that look like us, that reflect our values, and that are speaking to the issues that matter to everyday working class Americans.
I'll try to go really quickly. I think thank you for this question. It definitely can be really complex and depends on sort of like the situation, the context, all of those things. But I'll say a couple of like what I think are hopefully really concrete tips. So I think that first, you have to figure out if this person is telling you to wait because they really truly do believe that this, it might be better to wait a certain amount of time, or whether this is just a strategy, right, to just hold you off and stave you off in perpetuity. I think that's the first thing you have to assess. And then sort of, I think you have to come to them and say, all right, well, give me a timeline, right? Give me a clear timeline with different markers so we can get to this end goal, and really make clear that you are on the side of this sort of end goal that I want to be on. Because I think when you start pushing people to say, all right, well, fine, like give me, a timeline, let's start planning it out. That's when you'll see them sort of like waffle or be uncomfortable, because really they just don't want that end goal, right? And so once you've made clear like where they stand, then you can start to build, kind of unfortunately without them if you have to. I mean, you have to keep good relationships, but then, in the meanwhile, sort of start building your coalition of people who are for that end goal to the point where they honestly cannot stand in your way, is kind of what I think. Because honestly, things start to change via mass numbers, right? And when it really just to move in our direction. So I really think that you have to focus on, okay, what is this goal I want, and how can I sort of like bring together others to accomplish this goal? And anyone who is going to stand in your way, you have to really think about, you know, being strategic in sort of in circumnavigating them, and being clear and understanding that they are, you know, standing in your way. And I think from my time in DC and watching national politics, very often politicians will say, I literally was at a hearing about legalizing marijuana where politicians were saying, oh, you know, we're moving too fast. Meanwhile, there have been 30 or 40 laws across the country about legalizing marijuana since the 70s, right? And they're saying, oh, we haven't had a hearing. We need more research. Like, this is clearly just, you know, is clearly just a tactic to stave people off and to buy time. So I think kind of really differentiating from that, and then, you know, moving from there, because sometimes it may not be that really isn't the right moment right now for a project or an idea. And then sometimes they're just trying to put you off. So I think understanding that is the first really point.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you, ladies, so much. Oh my, I feel so empowered just listening to you, the two of you. Please take the time to plug yourselves, your social medias where everyone can follow your works, what you do and how they can help the cause as well. Please put in your socials and such into the chat box for everyone to see and to now engage along with you. I am speechless to say the least. That thank you so much from the two of you, and to all of our attendees that joined. I hope you guys all feel empowered. I hope you all realize that we are all capable to, you know, enact real change in our communities. You know, it starts at, well, like I always say to myself, think globally, but act locally. You know, that's very important, and the two of you are priming examples of that. Ladies, thank you so much. If I may give you a round of applause.
And this will not be the last of our workshops. They may not all be Black liberation workshops, but we are certainly planning a series of topical workshops for the POC communities.
Absolutely.
So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Follow us on our Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to keep up with what we are doing over here at OneM. This is only the beginning. We have a lot more to share. Thank you, everyone. I wish you all well, and everyone have a good night. Stay safe during these COVID times. God bless everyone.
Thank you so much.
Have a great night.
Have a great